Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tent of Abraham. I'm Tamir Kreisman from Jerusalem, Israel. We continue with Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. This one is called The Fifth Descent, and God Knew. As we discussed, all God's descents from the beginning of time until the last one at the end of time, coming soon to a mountaintop near you. So let's start with a few verses from Tehillim. Hallelu et Adonai kol goyim, shabechu kol ha'omim, ki gavar alenu chasdo ve'emet Adonai le'olam hallelujah. So last week, I know it was pretty intense. There's a lot going on. We're going to take it down a notch for this week. There's a lot of story time, and as you can see, we're also moving along with the timeline from the Tanakh. So last week we just finished Joseph. Now we're going to we're going to continue the story from the book of Exodus. We're going to the time of Moses. And this is the fifth descent of the Holy One, blessed be He. And that was during the burning bush, as said in Exodus 3:8. I have descended, says God to Moses. I have descended to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Okay? Va'ered. Yerida is a descent. So question, why did God choose a bush to reveal himself to Moses? Right? I mean, we take these things for granted. It's funny. We take everything that's written there for granted, like, okay, this happened, that happened. Yes, it did, but we can inquire and we have to actually understand why. So, why did God actually choose a bush to reveal himself to Moses? The same reason that God chose Mount Sinai to give his Torah from, and the same reason he chose Temple Mount. Both mountains are significantly smaller than all the other surrounding mountains. And if any of you guys have been to Temple Mount, you can easily see it resides in sort of like a valley surrounding and overshadowed by the surrounding mountains, making it almost like a hill. And why did God choose Israel? Same thing. I hope you see a theme over here. God answers in Deuteronomy 7:7, not because you are greater than any people did the Lord delight in you and choose you, for you are the least of all the peoples. Ki atem hame'at mikol ha'amim. Me'at could also mean small in numbers, but it also means the smallest, the littlest, the most insignificant, right? So in other words, in status regarding the world. And so, why a tiny little bush, perhaps? I mean, I don't know exactly the size, but it specifically says a bush and not a plant and not a tree. Why? Because, hear me out, okay? As this could be an outlandish idea. Why not a huge and massive pine or spruce tree? One that can be lit the hell up and decorated as a sign of God choosing us. See where I'm going? Yep. I mean, yeah, of course, I know what it says later in verse 25 and 26 in Deuteronomy. The graven images of their gods you will burn with fire. You shall not covet the silver and gold that is upon them and take it for yourself, lest you be ensnared for it. For it is an abomination to the Lord your God, nor shall you bring an abomination into your house, lest you are to be destroyed like it. But you shall utterly detest it, and you shall utterly abhor it, for it is to be destroyed. Yes, and I also know what it says in Deuteronomy 16:20-21. You shall not plant for yourself an Asherah, or a tree near the altar of the Lord your God, which you shall make for yourself, and you shall not set up for yourself a monument which the Lord your God hates. And I also know what it says in Jeremiah 10, verses 2, 3, and 4. So says the Lord, of the way of the nations you shall not learn, and from the signs of the heaven be not dismayed, for the nations are dismayed from them. For the statutes of the people are vanity, for it is but a tree that one can cut from the forest, the handiwork of a carpenter. With a small axe, with silver and gold he beautifies it. With nails and with sledgehammers they strengthen them, so that it does not bend. Yep, I know what it says. So, why a teeny tiny little bush? Because God shows his humility by choosing the humblest of people. The lowest of mountains, the humblest of people, that's life, okay? The lowest of mountains, that's intimacy. The smallest of trees, of the this is the plant life. Everything is kind of coming together over here. A small, dark, quiet room, right? By which to communicate to the world. Quite literally the opposite of what they do. The very opposite of what they do. And this is just one of countless examples as we have already covered. You see, it all comes down to humility. There is no big, there is no robust. That happens in the end. That happens when everything is in place, and that comes from God. Not from us, not from people. We don't set up all these big... That's not how we do things. God forsook the mountain and into the bush and dwelt there. Where was Moses at this point? He was on Mount Sinai, also known as Har Chorev, Har HaElohim, the mountain of the Elohim. This is also known as the mountain of God, and since it was a holy mountain, it was worthy of the Shekhinah to dwell there. But God humbled himself even more and chose a bush. This is the concept of Tzimtzum, reduction, diminishment, diminution, to decrease. This is how reality actually came to exist. God decreased himself. Now, how much did God diminish himself? And the bush was filled with grief and distress, it says, and filled with thorns and thistles. Just like Israel, who is the rose of God, as said in the Song of Songs 2:1 and 2, I am the lily of Sharon, the rose of the valleys, as a rose among the thorns, so is my beloved among the daughters. In our series, what was it? The Calling All Sparks, our sages say specifically about this verse, Israel is the rose surrounded by the thorns, represented by the crown of thorns. You know exactly what's going on over there. In other words, the nations, particularly Edom, the Christians, Christianity is who has been poking us the entire time. And still, that is where, as small as we are, still we are somehow protected in there, not because of them, but because of God, right? Just as Israel are surrounded by thorns, the nations, so too God shows Moses that he came to answer Israel's cry in Exodus 2:25. And God saw the children of Israel, and God knew. Vayera Elohim et bnei Israel, veyada Elohim. He knew. And now we know why he did abide in the midst of the thorn bush, which was a sign of grief and distress. Why? Because he saw that Israel were in a time of grief and distress, and so he dwelt among them in distress, as said in Isaiah 63:9. In all their troubles, he was troubled. Bechol tzaratam lo tsar. Right? And the angel of his presence saved them. With his love and with his pity, he redeemed them, and he bore them and he carried them all the days of old. What is the days of old? The 40 years in the wilderness. בכל צרתם לא צר ומלאך פניו הושיעם באהבתו ובחמתו הוא גאלם. גאולה, that's the redemption. וינטלם וינשם כל ימי עולם. So kol yemei olam, it does mean days of old, but kol yemei olam, olam, modern Hebrew means world, but ad olam means forever, eternity. So who carried the title of the angel of his presence? The Hebrew word is panav, right? Umalach panav hoshiem. So literally translates as the angel of his face. Fine, we'll go with that. Who did God speak face to face to? Whose face was covered because it was beaming with light and the people could not behold it? Remember, angel in Hebrew is malach, which is the same word for emissary, shaliach, malach, messenger. Did Moses not go among his people when they were in distress while he was the prince of Egypt, 60 years before this event on Mount Sinai takes place? The prime example of humility in the universe, God, gave the literal book of humility, the Torah, to the humblest man to have ever lived, according to God's word. Moses. It's beautiful. Rabbi Levi says, the staff that was created in the twilight was given to the first man in the Garden of Eden, and Adam gave it to Enoch, and Enoch gave it to Noah, and Noah gave it to Shem, and Shem gave it to Abraham, and Abraham gave it to Isaac, and Isaac gave it to Jacob, and Jacob took it down to Egypt, where he gave it to Joseph. Now, this entire transaction over time, as written, is incomplete, what we just read from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, but only because PDE is Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, is not meant for newbies, which I believe that you guys are not, meaning Adam could not have given the staff to Enoch because Adam died before Enoch was born. But if you read the book of Jasher, which again you should, and we're going to be covering a lot from Jasher here, you will see that Adam gave it to Seth, who gave it to Jared, who gave it to Enoch. So in other words, some of these names you don't necessarily need to mention, even though, for instance, Seth was righteous just like his father. It says, and he was, and Adam begot Seth after his likeness, after his image. In other words, he looked like his father, and he had the same kind and good deeds as his father. After Adam did Shuvah, he lived like a righteous man, right? Nevertheless, you don't necessarily need to mention everybody, but this is how it got to them, okay? So the other thing, that Enoch had already been taken to heaven and transformed into the angel Metatron before Noah was born. So what's going on over here? But we understand that he passed it unto his son Methuselah, who was Noah's grandfather and also the most righteous of his generation, who then passed it to Noah. Noah then passed the staff to his son Shem, also known as Melchizedek. And later, when Melchizedek would have the honor and privilege to meet Abraham, he passed the staff along with the title of Melchizedek to him, or rather, God removed it from Shem and gave it to Abraham. Again, Melchizedek is a title. We discussed this in the Immaculate Conception class, the real one. There were several other things that made it down this specific line, such as the garments of Adam and Eve, that God made for them from the serpent's skin. Though Ham, Noah's brazen son, stole them, then he gave it to his son Cush, who then gave it to his son Nimrod, right? And as we know, Nimrod then put them on, and he became, as the text says, a mighty hunter before God. He was mighty to begin with, but when he put that on, now he controlled all of nature. Because he wore the very clothes that God had fashioned, which made him even more powerful than he already was. Back to the staff. Again, like I said, there are a few other items that were passed down from Adam, which is how Adam was able to create civilizations, how you have single individuals are able to build cities and create civilizations, things that today we can't even begin to imagine, okay? Way more advanced than we are today. But this is not the class for that. So back to the staff. As this was no normal stick, but it was of the same material as the first tablets, which was from the throne of God. So this staff made it all the way from Adam to Joseph. And where we can see it is in the simple text during this time. How do we know that it actually got down there? Genesis 32:11. In fact, we just read it in this week's Parsha. When Jacob is conversing with God before he subdued the angel of Esav. 32:11, Genesis 32:11, I have become small from all the kindness and from all the truth that you have rendered your servant. For with my staff I crossed the Jordan, and now I have become two camps. In other words, all he had was a staff. Esav sent his son to come and kill Jacob, took all his money, all he was left with the staff. That's what he crossed back with. So it says in Hebrew, b'makli. Makli literally means with my stick. Makel is a stick. Mate is a staff. So why stick and not staff? He knew exactly what it was, but most people did not. As to them, it looked like no more than a regular wooden stick. We would later find out that this stick actually controls nature because it is above nature. But its power can only be realized should the holder be found worthy and the time right. You know, just like Thor's hammer. Where do you think they got all that stuff from? So, when Joseph died and they pillaged his household, the staff was placed in the palace of Pharaoh. Going back to Jasher as a reference, you will see how life became increasingly difficult for the children of Israel once Joseph and his brothers died, as their strength and status died with them. We'll go right now. Let's take this opportunity, I guess. We'll say that again, you know exactly what I think of the modern secular Zionist state of Israel. That has nothing to do with Torah at all. Nothing. Zero, zilch. They took that name recognition and they turned it into something that it is. Nevertheless, God still uses it. We still say, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. The modern Zionist anti-Torah state of Israel that was formed to go against Torah by a dude who actually converted to Christianity. That's right. Herzl converted to Christianity. So did his kids. Miserable. They killed themselves. Terrible story. Tragic. And yet he's the hero of it. You see how messed up the state is? You have no idea. In any case, we still say Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. It is the beginning of the sprouting of our redemption. And it absolutely is. Founded in 1948. Abraham, our father, was born in 1948 to the creation of the world. So anyway, we'll go with the modern state of Israel as being the strength, or rather the confidence of Jews all over the world. They never had it this good in America until the modern state of Israel had been established. And because of that, then Jews, living in the States and in France and in the UK and wherever they desire, because there's the state of Israel. We'll call that, let's say, the king, right? The throne. So when Joseph, the king, died, all of a sudden, slowly but surely, there's nobody really there to protect the little guy, if you will. Look what happens now when the state of Israel is coming into question by the world. Again, all this is according to plan. This we have already written. It's already been written. We read this. We know this is coming, no doubt. What is happening? The fabric of Jewish society is starting to crumble. The more people, the more the nations attack Israel, the more Jews outside of Israel have to be very afraid. Still, there are Jews that do not understand this, but I can tell you this right now. Despite what is happening here, and yes, we got a war down south and a war up north, and the war up north, that's the one that we're looking for. As it says, mitzafon tipatach ha'ara, the evil shall come from the north. So this thing down south, this is a conflict with the freaking terror organization, okay? What's up north? That's what we got to worry about. Anyway, and then when that happens, all we could say is God help us, because our army won't, our government won't, nobody will, nobody can, only God. It's a beautiful thing. So, despite all this, Jews living in America, are you guys crazy? Are you nuts? You nuts. You have less than 2 years to get all your affairs together, to come here and establish yourselves here. Otherwise, gates are closed. That's it. It's all over. We told you, we warned you, there's nothing else that we can do. People still don't see it. No, it's not going to happen here. We're good. We're a strong community. We got guns. Now we got gates. That's also not going to help you. You have no idea what's coming, okay? What's coming is beyond anyone's control. Get out. Okay. So going back to Jasher as a reference, you'll see how life became increasingly difficult for the children of Israel once Joseph and his brothers died, as their strength and status died with them. Slowly but surely, their equal rights were removed. They had to do more work for less pay. They couldn't own any property. And all that they had was either looted by the Egyptians or seized by Pharaoh. Soon, you'll be lucky to be breathing. And Jethro was one of the magicians of Egypt. Jethro, the soon-to-be high priest of Midian and the future father-in-law of Moses, was one of the top 3 advisors to Pharaoh. The other 2, as we have learned, were Job, as in the book of, and Bilam. Yep, that guy. Now we know all about Bilam, the mortal enemy of Israel, quite literally the mortal enemy of Israel, and Moses in particular. But what most people don't know is that the only reason he was even alive was because of Jacob, i.e. Israel. Before Jacob went to the White House, the house of Lavan, again, all this is that were the examples that we're giving were just read in this week's Parsha. Before he went to the White House, Beit Lavan, Lavan means white, if you guys don't know, Lavan had only daughters and no sons. He had 4 daughters. He had Rachel and Leah from the same mother, and then he had Bilhah and Zilpah, who were his daughters from his concubines. So in other words, they were 4 sisters with 3 mothers, okay? So by the merit of Jacob, prosperity came to Lavan's house. He was doing okay. He was a swindler. Lavan ha'arami, Aleph, Resh, Mem, Yud. That's how the Torah says, Lavan ha'arami. Arami, if you switch the letters, it also spells Ramai. He was a swindler. He was a cheat. Leramot is to cheat. It's right there in the name. So again, he did okay for himself, but again, he still wanted money, he coveted money. When Eliezer came to find Rivka, to find a bride for Yitzchak, and he gave him all these gifts, he's like, okay, we need to keep an eye on that family. That's why when he heard when Jacob was coming, he ran to greet him. And he goes, well, you're traveling light, buddy. Where's all the, the 10 camels with all the gold and silver? He didn't have anything, right? Because he gave it to Eliphaz, so he shouldn't kill him. So what happened? Okay, so Lavan, he obviously, if we have money, we want more money. Nevertheless, he was getting by, we'll say. But when Jacob came, prosperity came to Lavan's house. Prosperity came to the entire area. Jacob flipped open, like we studied this, I don't know, last month or something like this. He flipped open the stone from the well. When he saw Rachel, he told the rest of the shepherds, yo, listen, water your sheep and get out of here. I got to go. My date's coming, right? And they said, we can't. We have to wait till all the dudes come here because together we got to lift off the stone from the well because the water was limited. So only when they all watered their sheep could they water their sheep, right? It says, Kmo pkak, Rashi says, like a bottle cap. He removed the stone. He says, all right, quickly, she's coming. You understand? And since then, the water kept on overflowing from there. In other words, that was a sign that a true tzaddik was in their presence. The water kept on overflowing, which is, by the way, this is also how Lavan knew that Jacob had left because the water stopped, okay? So water is always a sign of Mashiach. We see this with Rivka. She came to the well, the water drew up to her. Same thing with Jacob, right? Rivka's son. Okay. Anyway, so not only was Lavan blessed by Jacob's presence, not only in the form of livestock, which translated to tremendous wealth, but also in the form of sons. Lavan now had sons because of Jacob, one of which was Beor. Ring any bells? Numbers 22:5. He sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor. There you go. Bilam was the grandson of Lavan. Lavan had a bone to pick with Jacob, so you better believe he raised his son and grandson to hate Israel. This is a very, we still see this concept today. What is going on, for instance, in Gaza, right? Is it right? What are we going to do? All these innocent people. Nobody's innocent, okay? On 9/11, they paraded in the streets at 3,000 dead Americans. And when this tragedy happened just a month and a half ago, they were doing the same thing. They were beating the dead corpses and the women that they were parading around the streets naked. Children and women and men all in the streets cursing at them and beating them and flogging them. You had plenty of Gazans coming into, partaking in the beheading because, our military was nowhere to be found for 8 to 12 hours. So yeah, there are no innocents. And think about it like this. Every single one of those little kids, you see the little kids, right? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, 10 years old. Where do you think they're going to grow up? They're not going to grow up wanting peace. They're going to grow up because their parents or their surroundings say, see those guys there? They're the devil. They are the enemy. And you got to kill them. You got to be a shaheed and you got to rape their women and behead their children because that's what we do, right? So this is what is instilled in them from birth. So guess what? These kids are going to grow up wherever they are in the world, do whatever they want, and we're breeding new terrorists, basically. Same thing here. Bilam was nothing more than a gun for hire. He was a terrorist, and he had a personal bone to pick with Israel, and that's why he kept on coming after Israel all those years until he met his end by Israel. So Lavan hated Jacob so naturally he would raise his children and his children's children with the same mindset. Bilam was also the advisor to Pharaoh, who told him to drown the male children of Israel. First he said, kill them all. Okay, then just the male children. Job abstained, right? They asked Job. Job's like, hey, whatever the king wants, let the king do, which is pretty much the same thing as going along with it. Remember, okay? Not choosing is a choice. You say, I abstain. You just made a choice right there. And Jethro was the only one who argued against it, putting his life on the line. He said, Lord King, these people, and he started going with the history from Abraham. Nimrod threw him in the fire, and they defeated the 4 kings, and then the sons of Jacob and everything. He says, why don't you just send them back to the land of Canaan, to their homeland, and get rid of them? We don't want them here. They're not going to do us any good. And Pharaoh did not like that. So as a result, Jethro was exiled from Egypt and returned to his native land of Midian, thereby not only saving his own life, as his end would have been with the rest of Egypt, just like theirs, but he then merited to have Moses as his son-in-law. And then, as we know, not only did he become the most famous and high-status convert in the world, but it was by his advice that the Sanhedrin would be formed. The famous Sanhedrin, that was Jethro. You've got to understand, his own children sat in the Sanhedrin. Incredible individual, this guy. Now, there's a reason that God allows certain people to see things while others cannot. A question we should be asking ourselves every day. How come I can see it, but they don't? But I thought he's a great rabbi and is a great tzaddik. How could he not see? I tell you, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, if a man could see what lurks all around him when the lights go out, he would die of fear. How do I explain this? The people that we tend to trust most, I'm talking about socially in a society, even, yes, and of course, the man-made box of Judaism has, it's the only thing that's it's the only thing that's sort of like a remnant of the way of God. But if you knew what goes on, you would be terrified. But again, it's all by design. It's written in Masechet Sotah, exactly this and this and that, and exactly who and what is going to fall apart. And like we said in Bereshit, in Hakdamat Bereshit, in Sefer Hazor, it lists the 5 types of Erev Rav. If you want, you could look at the class I did in Acharit Rashit. Just look on the search thing. Just write Erev Rav, or the downfall of Erev Rav. There's 2 classes on there. There's 5 categories of Erev Rav. You can identify them based on what they're doing. And one of the categories that the Rashbi says, who wrote this 2,000 years ago, is that they are rabbis. Okay? Not all rabbis, of course. But how do we know who's good and who's bad? We listen very closely to what they say. And I could tell you, most are not good. Okay? Most are not good based on their words alone. I'm not naming names. Okay? And I'm not gonna. But most of them, I'm not talking about fake rabbis. I'm talking about the ones who actually got smicha, who are not legit. It's very, very scary. Anyway, so there is a reason, like we said, that God allows certain people to see things while others cannot see. So our text continues and says, and he, Jethro, saw the rod and the letters which were upon it. The Radal says that he saw the letters, but they were meaningless to him because he was a pagan. So in other words, you saw these it's like, let's say if I'm looking at Japanese today or looking at ancient glyphs or something, it meant something to somebody, but they're really nice lines over there. But something special, obviously, because this was this rod, this staff, it came from the throne of God. So he saw there was the explicit name of God, but he didn't understand it because he was very much impure, right? While everyone else just saw a good-looking wooden staff in Joseph's palace. That's what they saw. He needed to see it. Why? Because he needed to get it out of there to the hands of his would-be son-in-law. And he desired it in his heart. He desired to have it. Now, who gives us our desires? Do you think it's you or me? Listen, God gives us the desires that we have, the supposed desires that we have. Our desires are not our own. What we do with those desires, that is on us. Okay? At the end of the Amidah prayer, we ask God to fill our hearts with the desire for Torah. Is that taking away free will? No. Whenever you have an urge to do something, right? It's the same thing. I desire now to be inappropriate with a woman, right? Who put that desire? Did I put that desire? No. What am I doing? My action is, am I going to give into that desire, which is the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination? Or am I going to stand against it and say, absolutely not? You see? Okay. God's reign is not limited, as he controls our hearts as well, which we have seen when he hardened Pharaoh's heart again and again before Pharaoh finally broke. Okay, so again, the desires, but you can't come to God and say, well, you put that desire in me. Yes, God did put that desire in you, but you chose to go after it, knowing full well if it was right or wrong. Because again, you will have to give an account of this, and you can't tell God. It's the same thing like Adam told God, well, the woman that you gave me, the desire that you gave me, so that's your fault, essentially. Oy vavoy, look what happened as a result. If Adam would have been like, I sinned, that he never would have left the Garden of Eden, right? Do not push this off on God. You do what you want to do, regardless of what comes at you. God gives us the evil inclination to overcome it. That's its job. And Jethro, and he took it and he brought it and he planted it in the midst of the garden of his house. No one was able to approach it anymore. Let's read the description in the book of Jasher. And afterward Moses went into the garden of Reuel, which was behind the house. Reuel was the actual name of Yitro. Yitro is more like a title, like the Pope. But Reuel actually had, I think, 7 names or something like that. And he there prayed to the Lord his God, who had done mighty wonders for him. And it was that whilst he prayed, he looked opposite him, and behold, a sapphire stick. See? A sapphire stick was placed in the ground, which was planted in the midst of the garden. To everybody else, it looked like a regular stick. And he approached the stick, and he looked, and behold, the name of the Lord God of hosts was engraved thereon, written and developed upon the stick. How did he recognize it? Because Moses already used God's name to kill the Egyptian when he was 20 years old. That's why he had to flee Egypt. Moses was born a very high soul. Remember, the house filled with light, right? This was Moses we're talking about. And he read it and stretched forth his hand, and he plucked it like a forest tree from the thicket, and the stick was in his hand. And this is the stick with which all the works of our God were performed after he had created heaven and earth, and all the hosts of them, the seas, the rivers, and all their fishes. Then it gives us the entire story of how it was handed down from Adam and ended up until, like what we discussed, until when we read now, and all the mighty men of the Kenites, Kini, also know these are Yitro's people. That's why later on in the book of Joshua, he's going to see, and he spoke to the Kenites, the Kini. The Kini is an allusion towards Yitro. Why the Kenites? It comes from Cain, Kinim. Jethro was a reincarnation of Cain, who murdered Abel, the first murderer in history, if you will. Actually, the second, if you think about Garden of Eden. Anyway, Cain, right? Cain, through Yitro, had a tikkun, because now not only was he a good and righteous person, coming directly out of paganism and everything that came with it, he became part of Israel. What a tikkun that is, right? And the great thing is that Moses is a reincarnation of Abel. See that? Now, in the beginning, Abel was submitted to Cain as Moses was submitted to his father-in-law. And then later on in Parashat Yitro, you see when Jethro comes and he bows down at Moses' feet. Moses bows down. He's like, no, I'm bowing down at your feet. And then they were one together, right? It was a beautiful thing. Anyway, that's like a full circle thing. Okay, so, and all the mighty men of the Kenites tried to pluck it when they endeavored to get Zipporah, his daughter, but they were unsuccessful. So that stick remained planted in the garden of Reuel until he who had a right to it and took it. And when Reuel saw the stick in the hand of Moses, he wondered at it, and he gave him his daughter Zipporah for a wife. I looked this up, right? T.H. White, he's the author of The Sword and the Stone, likely got his idea from the ancient book of Jasher. The Torah is the most original book there is, people, because it was literally here before anything else was. So everything that would come, every story, every idea ever thought up, it's all there. So let's just read according to Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, because it says something here that Jasher does not, and that is, when Moses came to his house, he went into the garden of Jethro's house, and he saw the rod and read the letters which were upon it, and he put forth his hand and he took it. Jethro watched Moses and said, "This one in the future will redeem Israel from Egypt." Therefore, he gave him Zipporah his daughter to a wife, as it is said, and Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter. This is in Exodus 2:21. How did Jethro know this? How did Jethro know he's going to be the future redeemer of Israel? One could say that since he was the high priest of Midian, he was very wise, nobody's doubting that, and obviously used sorcery. No one is doubting that either, which, as we have learned, allows you to know the future. That's one of the many types of sorcery that there is, right? But this was not the case, as he didn't need sorcery or he didn't need prophecy to know what was going on. You see, Jethro was there in the beginning, as we discussed. Now, this is from Jasher, going back a little bit before Moses was even born. And Balaam, the son of Beor, answered the king and said unto him, "This means nothing else but a great evil that will spring up against Egypt in the latter days." Pharaoh had a dream, shining star coming, destroying, all that stuff, right? Balaam is interpreting his dream. For a son will be born to Israel who will destroy all Egypt and its inhabitants. It's Moses. And bring forth the Israelites from Egypt with a mighty hand. Pharaoh then said, "Well, what shall we do?" And Balaam answered the king and said, "Send now and call thy 2 counselors." Who are they? We're going to get to it. "And we will see what their advice is upon the matter, and afterwards thy servant will speak." And the king sent and called his 2 counselors, Reuel the Midianite, i.e. Jethro, and Job the Uzite. And they came and sat before the king. Jethro, like we said, is a title, just like Pharaoh, but the man's name was Reuel. Shortly after this exchange, Jethro was exiled, but he knew a son would be born to deliver Israel. When Moses was born and then raised in Pharaoh's palace, upon his very lap, Jethro knew who this child was. He didn't need to be there to know exactly what was going on there, right? And so did Balaam, who was there, which is why he tried time and again to kill Moses. So many times he tried to kill Moses. The reason Balaam fled was because Moses was trying to kill him when he was like 18 years old. And if God had not intervened, Balaam would have actually succeeded in killing Moses. Jethro also heard that Moses betrayed Egypt by killing one of his own for the sake of a Hebrew slave, and that he was on the run. This was 50 years prior. Jethro knew. I say 50 because Moses was in prison in Jethro's house for 10 years. Okay? So from 20... Moses left at 20. He was a king in Cush for 50 years. Then he went to Midian. 10 years later, that's 60 years. Moses is now 80 years old. All right? And they came home to their father Reuel and told him what Moses did for them. These are the daughters. Moses shooed the shepherds, right? And they said, "An Egyptian man has delivered us from the hands of the shepherds, and he drew up water for us and watered the flock." See, again, a very messianic figure, always by the well. Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, well. Moses, well. And Moses related to Reuel that he had fled from Egypt way back when, and that he reigned for 40 years over Cush, and that they afterwards had taken the government from him and sent him away in peace with honor and with presents. Read the book of Jasher. It's all there. Moses was a warlord. He was a warrior king, and so many times Balaam came against him and could not defeat Moses. So he's like, this is the one guy I can't beat. And when Reuel heard the words of Moses, Reuel said within himself, "I will put this man into the prison house, whereby I shall consolate the children of Cush, for he has fled from them. And they took him and put him in the prison house. And Moses was in prison 10 years. And whilst Moses was in the prison house, Zipporah, the daughter of Reuel, took pity over him and supported him with bread and with water all that time. We know the rest, okay? Finally let him out. Why is this guy still alive? It's been 10 years. Well, I've been feeding him every day. I guess no one's coming for him. Okay, you could be a shepherd. And when Moses got out, that's when he picked up the staff. That's what happened over there. And so when Moses was not able to when Moses was not only able to pluck the staff out from the ground like a branch off a rotting tree, but as Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says, no one else could even get near the staff. The power that came off it would repel anyone who was unclean, as it had been waiting for its owner, Moses. Jethro put 2 and 2 together, and he realized that this was the son that Bilam spoke of 80 years ago, the one who would destroy Egypt and lead his people back to the land of Canaan. What we can learn from these wonderful stories is as follows. We all have, hear me out. We all have a destiny, but you might be thinking, well, if that's the case, then whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. Incorrect, as that is the worldly misunderstanding. So we're going to have to use another word right now, okay? We'll call it potential. Everyone has potential. We all have a specific purpose and potential that we will or will not fulfill because it's our choice, right? God puts the desire in our hearts. That's the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Ra. Desire to do good, desire to do evil. That's why we pray to God, fill me with the desire to do good, so it'll be easier for me to do good. But if you don't do your job, God will get someone else who will. It's as simple as that. You don't want to miss that. Fortunately for us, and for the whole world, really, our forefathers did their jobs, and though we might be reading about it as if it's just a story, one sentence or a chapter or a trial, this is actually not the case. Try and understand this, as this might hurt your brain, okay? The Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, right? Then we have the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, the prophets, and then the writings. The Torah, the 5 books of Moses, this is the blueprint of all of creation, of all of reality. It is the Torah. The Torah was here first. God looked in the Torah and through the Torah. The Torah was the filter. God gave life through the Torah, and from the Torah, the world and all of reality came out to be. Now, if that's the case, then how could it possibly have been written within it what would be and all the choices that would be made, correct? Did that come before or after? The Torah is not a storybook, although it does tell us stories. And if you read it in any other language, that's really all you're going to get. You might learn a bit about morality. He did this, he was that, he was kind, he was brave, he was humble, and so on and so forth. But that's real. That's also not what it is. I mean, it's definitely there and it exists. There are books upon books about Musar, about how to conduct yourself. You could learn that. All right? Every person's name is in the book. From Adam to Noah, from Abraham to Moses, all have meanings that already existed before the world was. Even their names have meanings. Why are we told after the 5 books are complete by the very next one, Joshua, to dwell on this book, the 5 books of Moses, day and night? Because all the answers to all our questions are within that book. You could say, well, today, modern day problems, this, that, how does it possibly relate to that? All the answers are in the book. If you're thinking, well, the stories of then aren't the stories today, it's not about the stories. You see, you have to dig deeper. And if you don't have a deep understanding of Hebrew, and if you do not learn, and if you do not have that understanding in general, or the knowledge, you're not going to get it. You're going to read these wonderful stories, which, are still enough to give you a moral compass of how to live. But you'd still be missing that point. So, like we said, all the answers are within it. Everything that we would ever have to face is right in the Torah. And by dwelling on this book in purity, in humility and openness. Through it, God will give us understanding, thereby helping each and every one of us fulfill their potential. That's why God said, you want it? It's right here, but that's where it is. And guess what? You know who else has their name in the book? From the book of Daniel 12:1. Now at that time, our time, Michael, the great prince who stands over the children of your people, will be silent. And it will be a time of distress that was never since a nation existed until that time. And at that time, your people will escape everyone who is found inscribed in the book. Meaning, if you're not in the book, you're not escaping. So look in the mirror. The names, the people, the characteristics, the trials, the joy, the sadness, it's all there. And it's all written in letters that have their own distinct personality. Everything is alive. As we read in the beginning of the Zohar, the letters came to God. I want, start the Torah with me, start the Torah with me. Every single letter, starting from the last one from Tav, going all the way up to Bet, because we did start with Bet, Bereshit. Everything you see is but a physical manifestation of a spiritual truth. All these stories that just so we'll call it so happen to be, even though they didn't happen to be. Something else is coming from the spiritual realm that manifested like that in the physical reality. Okay? Only we know that the physical reality is what shapes the spiritual. So what came first, you see? As we've learned time and time again, it is we down here in the realm of Asiyah, of action, in the world of Malchut, kingship, that bring about the change in the upper worlds. So why do you think the powers that be are doing this? The powers that be. Yes, not the powers that be. The powers that be. The governments and all the super secret groups. Cool kids clubs. Why are they starting a war now? First a fake plague. Now creating a conflict. Why? This is all to distract you. None of it matters, you have to understand. As serious as it is, and yes, people's lives are, absolutely, but none of it matters. I'm not saying that life doesn't matter. What I'm saying is that they are creating this conflict, not for the sake of the conflict, for the sake of keeping you occupied. And from what? Like we said in the beginning, from that which they have no control over. And that is what is coming to the world. They cannot stop it, but they know that it is coming. Look up. Okay. They know the Torah better than most, and they know exactly what is coming, and they know that when it hits, the jig is up. There's no more pretending. There's not going to be any more governments. I'm not talking about the final redemption per se, although it is part of the absolute final redemption, but it means their end. In other words, when this happens, everyone is going to know, everyone, not just the people that are awake. The 99% that are still asleep are going to absolutely know. They're going to see that these people are liars. They're going to see everyone who is a liar. Everyone. And people will be terrified where I thought that my rabbi or my best friend or my this or my that or my that, and you are absolutely evil. Wow. Terrifying. And there are going to be many angry people in the world, which is why they made a deal with death that we read about in Isaiah 28:15. Ki amaltem karatnu brit et mavet. For you said, we have made a treaty with death, and with the grave we have set a limit. When an overflowing scourges passes, it shall not come upon us. For we have made lies our shelter. We have made lies our shelter. In other words, we have sheltered ourselves with lies. That's why this is a lie. Everything you see is a lie. That's why protests are a lie. You're protesting something that is not real. And in falsehood, we have hidden ourselves. All the falsities, everything, all the lies are all coming off. That's why it's all a lie. Everything, all of it, everything that they are doing, and no matter how hard they try, they will always fail. They cannot succeed. This is where the battle with fear has to come in. From Nimrod to Lavan to Pharaoh to Haman, and everyone since, they all tried. They all lied and they all tried. And they all got taken out by those who they tried to kill. That would be us. We're still here. So it will be their ends as well. Those who attempted to play God. God knew Israel's cry back then, like a lion protecting its young. He came out of his slumber and okay, here we go. And God knew. And so if we don't cry out like the lions that we are, Judah, God will not come. So he gives us a reason to cry out. He helps us, right? He helps us along by sending the pharaohs and the Hamans of history. But it doesn't have to get to that, please God. May it not come to that. Little by little, right? Everything is little by little. Because if it does, I honestly, I don't know who's going to remain. As it is, we know that 80% of Israel are supposed to be gone. But this time is going to be different than back then. See, this time, a lot of Israel today, they're not real Jews. They are absolute Erev Rav. Because there's so much impurity, there's so much tumah amongst Israel that even people that think, yeah, I'm a Jew, whatever, but I'm Israeli first, and they don't keep according to the basic laws. In other words, they get married not in a kosher way. They have unity not in a kosher way. Therefore, the children that they bring are impure neshamot to this world, not in a kosher way. Some are supposed to do this because that is their tikkun, but in most cases, they're not going to be here. Everybody's got a choice. You have to understand, every Jew has a choice. But most of them, because of where they actually come from, they're going to choose the darkness, right? And this is part of the Erev Rav. Again, listen to the class again. So if it does come to this again, I don't know who's going to remain. And it will be a time of distress that never was, since a nation existed until that time. And at that time, your people will escape everyone who is found inscribed in the book. So just remember, the cries, if you cry, God knew. God always knows. Use this time, please. Contact me if you need any help, okay? That's why I have the email, but only if you're serious. Because otherwise, I'm not wasting my time at all. There's more important things to do. But if you need help, that's why I'm here. Anyway, that's our class for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a wonderful rest of the week and have a Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.